Sometimes, don't we do this? We read things in the Bible and they just seem bizarre, don't they? Chapter 13 of the book of Mark is just like that. Plucked out of the context of that first century Jewish world, this is one of those chapters, well, let's be honest, you want to skip over, or worse, it causes you to shut the Bible and say, I've had enough. There's all this talk of destruction and suffering and the sun darkening and the moon not giving off light. Let's be honest, it's weird and it doesn't make much sense by itself. But here's the deal. When we read a passage like this in the Bible, context matters. Knowing the context of the author, it allows us to understand what the passage is getting at. So stick around and we're going to make some sense of these words. When you get to a passage in the Bible, like Mark chapter 13, a chapter that has you scratching your head and going, what? I want you to say to yourself, I wonder what was going on in the author's world. Because when it comes to the Bible, the author's context, it matters a lot. Now bear with me here. We're going to go way back to that first century world of the Bible. Remember, the book of Mark was written around the year 69 CE. What was going on in Jerusalem in 69 CE? Now here's what was happening. After years of Roman oppression under the Holy Roman Empire, Jewish leaders, they launched a revolt against Rome. It was in June of 66, which would lead to what was called the Jewish-Roman War. In November of that year, a Roman general, Cestus Gallus, he led a powerful Roman army into Jerusalem, but thinking he was going to walk all over the scrappy Jewish resistance, he was ill-prepared, and those Jewish rebels, they held him off. Of course, the Jewish leaders, they were certain that it was God's hand that protected them. They were safe. Well, shortly after that, the Romans, they made again advances on Jerusalem. This time it was Vespasian who led an army of some 6,000 heavily armed Roman troops into Jerusalem. But in the year 68, Roman officials, they for some reason called off the attack. And again, the Jewish resistance were certain God was on our side. But it was in the year 70 that the Roman general Titus, he would lead a brutal attack on Jerusalem. The city would be decimated. He even had the temple burned to the ground. Now, in order to understand what the author of Mark is saying in chapter 13, we have to know this context. The book of Mark was written during this battle. Chapter 13, it gives us a glimpse into the fears, the real fears of those first Jewish followers in that year. What would they do if the temple was gone? They believed God actually lived in the temple, that this was his home. Was the destruction of the temple a sign that God had abandoned them? This chapter is meant to reassure those first followers. Whatever destruction you face, God will never abandon you. Regardless of how horrible things get, God will remain faithful. God doesn't need a temple for a home. Whether the temple stands or it falls, God will always be with you. God has a new home. You will always know me, and I will always be with you in my new home, in your hearts. Chapter 13 is a message for those of us, you and me, who experience the fear that comes with sudden sorts of changes in our life. The author there is reminding us that change is inevitable. Change is coming, so keep alert, be on watch, stay awake, but know this, God will be faithful. You need not be afraid. Folks, here are a couple of questions for you to consider. First off, when you look back over your life, when were you most afraid? And what fears do you have today? And secondly, where do you believe God is at in the midst of those fears?